She was building a shelter with broken boards. Her dead husband's brother stood watching. Late autumn, Wyoming Territory, 1879. The wind cut sharp through the cottonwood, carrying with it the dry rustle of yellow leaves and the scent of early frost. Dust curled off the prairie floor like ghosts, with nowhere left to go. The sun hung low in a slate-gray sky, half veiled behind northern clouds that promised more than just cold. It was the kind of wind that whispered warnings if a man knew how to listen. Jonas Calder sat horseback on a rise above the valley, a dark figure against the pale sweep of land. His coat flapped gently in the breeze, hat brim tugged low to shade eyes that had seen too much and spoken too little. 8 months gone. 8 months of drifting saloons and freight jobs, hoping distance would ease the weight. It had not. And now, here he was again, staring down at the woman he had avoided since the day his brother died. Below him, near a bent sycamore tree by the dry creek bed, Mara Ellison worked with raw determination. She was a slight thing in a faded brown dress, sleeves rolled to the elbows, hair pinned haphazardly against the wind's tug. Her hands, wrapped in torn linen, shook as she drove another bent nail through a warped board. Jonas watched as she stepped back, assessed the angle, then hammered again. The board split down the grain with a loud crack. She flinched but did not cry out. Instead, she dropped the ruined piece, turned, and lifted another from a pitiful pile at her feet. The boards were scavenged, likely from the collapsed stable behind the old house. They were split, weather-stained, some with nails already rusted halfway out. It was barely lumber, more like the bones of a life already lost. Jonas shifted in his saddle. The creak of leather was the only sound he allowed. From this distance, she could not see him, and he did not yet have the courage to be seen. He had not written, had not come to the funeral, could not stand the sight of her standing alone beside a coffin meant for someone who should have lived longer, someone better. Jonas's jaw tightened. Mara was building a shelter, if it could be called that, no more than a lean-to against the wind. It would not last the night, not with those boards, not with that sky. He looked north. Clouds loomed heavy, the kind that turned ground hard and breath white. An early storm, maybe 2 days out, maybe less. Mara steadied a corner post with her shoulder and tried to drive a nail one-handed. The hammer missed, slipped, caught her thumb. She sucked in air through her teeth, shook her hand out, then raised the hammer again. Jonas closed his eyes. That kind of grit got people killed out here. She moved like someone who had nothing left to wait for. And maybe she did not. Then came the wind, a sudden gust, fierce and low, screamed across the valley like a warning. Jonas saw the lean-to shudder, the top beam rattle loose from its single rusted nail. Mara cried out softly, not in fear, but in effort. She threw her shoulder into the beam, holding it upright as the wind pressed harder. Jonas's horse stirred beneath him, sensing the change in air. He tightened the reins, eyes locked on the woman below. Her whole frame shook as she held the weight. Her boots slipped in the dirt, dress whipping around her legs, and still, she did not let go. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. His boot twitched in the stirrup, hands loosening, preparing to ride down, to do something, anything, but he stopped himself. She was Abel's wife, and he was the brother who lived. The wind eased. The post held, for now. Jonas exhaled slowly, his fingers curled tighter around the reins, knuckles white. She would not survive like this, and yet, he could not move, not yet. He stayed, watching, as Mara reached again for another broken board. The ridge wind had grown colder, biting deeper through the seams of Jonas's coat. He sat frozen in the saddle, staring down at Mara as she lifted another board, now visibly limping. A strange mix of grit and fragility clung to her, like glass forced to bear weight it was never meant to hold. He pulled the reins gently, turning the horse away from the ridge. She hates me. The thought struck like a stone in the gut. It was not just grief she carried that day Abel was buried. It was betrayal. Jonas had vanished, leaving her alone to bury the man who meant everything to them both. Maybe he had done it because he did not know how to face her, or worse, because he did not know how to face what her eyes might reveal. He rode slowly down the backside of the ridge, taking the long path through the cottonwoods, avoiding being seen. The wind chased dead leaves around his horse's hooves. Abel had always known what to say, always stepped in when guilt ran hot between the brothers. "You're the stubborn one," he once told Jonas. "But you got a conscience deep as the canyon. Don't let it drown you." Jonas had ignored that advice more times than he could count, until the day the canyon nearly took them both. He had not meant for the rocks to shift. It was supposed to be a shortcut. Abel followed because he trusted him. And Jonas had lived. Abel had not. The last thing Abel ever said, voice hoarse beneath the weight of crushed ribs, still rang inside Jonas's mind. "If I don't make it, don't let Mara be alone." Jonas swallowed hard as the ranch came into view, what remained of the Calder homestead, abandoned since spring. The house had sagged under neglect, porch half collapsed, but the barn still stood, a shell of their youth. He tied his horse near the rail fence and stepped inside, boots echoing in the emptiness. The storage loft still held what Abel had stockpiled the winter before. Boards, good ones, pine planks, seasoned and straight, a canvas tarp, thick and weatherproof, a proper hammer, a tin of oiled nails. Jonas touched each item like it was sacred. Then he saw it, folded atop a crate of saddle blankets, a dark green woolen shawl, simple, warm, and well-loved. Abel had given it to Mara during their first winter together. She used to wear it when the nights dropped below freezing. Jonas reached for it, then stopped. His hand hovered, trembling. "It's not mine to give." But she was out there in the cold, dying by inches. Pride would not keep her warm. Regret would not build shelter. He took it. Packing the gear onto his horse took time, each item tied with care, each knot checked. When the sun broke briefly through the clouds, Jonas mounted and turned back toward the ridge. By the time he returned, the light was fading fast. The lean-to was still standing, barely. Smoke curled from a small fire pit, but Mara was not near it. She was crouched beside the wall, pressing her full weight into the frame. One of the braces had failed. Her shoulder dug into the corner joint, arms trembling as she tried to hammer a board across the gap. Her hair had come loose, whipping across her face. She looked like someone barely holding on. She did not hear him approach. Jonas stepped down from the saddle. The boards creaked beneath her elbow. The wall shifted. He dropped the reins and ran. The collapse happened in a blink. The beam gave way with a groan. The whole side of the shelter tilted. Mara cried out, but there was no time to think. Jonas reached her just as the top brace split. He threw himself between her and the falling lumber, shoulder first, taking the brunt of the impact as the weight knocked them both to the ground. Dust rose. Boards clattered around them. Mara gasped, trying to push herself up. Jonas gritted his teeth against the pain and forced the debris off with one arm. She blinked, dazed, then froze as she realized who lay next to her. Jonas met her eyes, breath shallow. "You should not be alone out here," he said. Her expression shifted, shock, fury, and something unreadable. But she did not speak. Not yet. The silence that followed the collapse was thick and strange, broken only by the wind, tugging at loose boards, and the quiet rasp of breath between two people who had not spoken in nearly a year. Mara sat up slowly. Strands of hair stuck to her cheeks, dust clinging to her lashes. When she turned and saw Jonas kneeling beside her, the blood drained from her face. Her eyes locked onto his like a blow, fury, confusion, disbelief, and a shadow of pain so sharp it made Jonas flinch. "You?" she whispered, voice rough. "What are you doing here?" He stood, brushing dirt from his coat, then took a deliberate step back, giving her space. She pulled her shawl tighter across her shoulders, almost as if to shield herself from more than just the wind. "You have not been here for 10 months, she said, rising to her feet. "Not the funeral, not once after." Jonas looked down at the broken boards scattered around them. "I know." You just disappeared, Mara went on, breath catching. And now what? You ride in like some ghost? You think I need rescuing now? No, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. I think you need shelter, before that storm hits. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her hands were trembling. Jonas noticed the bandages, torn cloth, soaked through in places. One hand was swollen, purple around the knuckles. The hammer she'd been using lay half buried in the dirt. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken from more than just exhaustion. Jonas turned, walked to his horse, and untied the canvas bundle. He carried it over, placed it near the edge of the broken structure, and opened it without a word. Good lumber, real nails, a straight-handled hammer, a folded tarp, and finally, the dark green shawl, which he did not unpack. These boards, he said. They would not hold through the night. Mara did not answer. She only looked at the boards she had gathered, splintered, cracked, warped from old rain and wind. Her silence was not surrender. It was rage held in check by fatigue. I will help you put something together, Jonas said, not meeting her eyes. Then I will leave. No talk, no questions, just shelter. Mara's breath came harsh, uneven. She looked at him, long and hard, as if trying to decide whether she hated him more than she needed the help. Finally, her shoulders sagged. She gave a slow, stiff nod. Fine, she said, but I do not want your pity. You will not get it, he replied, and meant it. They moved without conversation. Jonas began pulling away the boards that had collapsed, setting aside the few that might still be useful. Mara stood off to the side at first, arms crossed tight, but eventually she knelt to retrieve her hammer. When her fingers failed to grip it properly, she winced, hiding it quickly. Jonas saw. Without a word, he reached into his saddlebag and pulled out his tin coffee cup. From the bedroll tied at the back of his saddle, he took a small flask of water. He had warmed it before leaving the homestead. He poured it carefully into the cup, watching steam curl into the cold air. He did not hand it to her. He did not speak. He set the cup gently on the flat stone near her blanket, just within reach. Then he turned away and began measuring the foundation anew. Mara looked at the cup, then at his back. Her eyes lingered on the way he worked, silent, steady, not expecting anything in return. She said nothing, but she picked up the cup. Jonas planted the first post with a firm stomp of his boot, pressing it deep into the dirt as the sun slid lower in the sky. The air was colder now, clouds thickening along the horizon like bruises. He measured the angle with his hands, checked the slope of the ground, then glanced over at Mara. You want the frame to lean a little, enough to carry the wind over, not catch it like a sail. Mara, arms crossed, stood watching. She had accepted the cup of warm water, but not much else. Here, he said, holding out a length of twine. Tie this around the beam before you hammer. Keeps it from shifting when the wind hits again. She took it without a word, crouching beside the other post. Her fingers were stiff, but she moved with surprising surety. Fast learner, careful grip, almost familiar. Just like Abel. Jonas swallowed against the tightness in his throat. They worked in silence for a while. The only sounds were the scrape of wood, the dull thud of hammer on nail, and the low whine of wind teasing through brittle grass. At one point, Mara looked up from where she braced a corner and asked, "Why did you come back?" Jonas paused mid-swing. The question sat between them like a blade. He adjusted the nail before answering. "I saw the storm coming. That's not what I asked." He sighed. "I guess. It just felt wrong not to." "That's not an answer either." He set the hammer down, jaw clenched. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, low and rough, "Abel died, saving me." Mara stiffened. "We were riding south of Eagle Ridge. Shortcut I insisted on. Loose shale. I was ahead when the slope gave out. He pulled me up before it took him." She didn't speak. The hammer in her hand didn't move. "I should have waited. Should have listened," he told me. "If he didn't make it, to look after you." Her eyes flashed. "And you thought building me a lean-to would even the score?" "No," he said quietly, but I couldn't sit up on that ridge and watch you freeze. She stepped toward him, voice low and cold. I never asked you to carry his guilt. I never needed your redemption. I know. Then why are you here? Jonas looked at her, really looked. Dirt on her cheek, dried blood on her knuckles, fire in her eyes. Because Abel would have been here, and I couldn't keep pretending I'm not part of what he left behind. Mara opened her mouth, but the wind interrupted her. A sudden gust roared down the valley, kicking up dust and jerking the half-built structure like a toy. Jonas reacted first, grabbing the main post as it began to tip. "Hold the corner!" he shouted. Mara darted to the opposite side, dropping to her knees, throwing her weight into the frame. Her hair whipped across her face. The tarp flapped wildly, threatening to tear free. Together, they held the shelter through the worst of it. Jonas's boots dug into the earth, hands locked around the beam. Mara leaned into the corner joint, teeth clenched. And then, stillness. The wind died as quickly as it had come, retreating like a predator circling for another strike. They breathed hard, shoulders rising and falling in sync. "You all right?" Jonas asked. Mara nodded, brushing her hair back. "I have held up worse." He allowed a faint smile. "I believe that." He turned toward the pile of lumber, but one board was gone. "Damn it," he muttered, scanning the ground. A plank, one of the good ones, had caught the wind and was tumbling down the incline toward the dry wash. Without thinking, he sprinted after it. Jonas! Too late. His boot hit loose gravel, and suddenly he was falling. His body twisted mid-air, then slammed onto the slope, rolling twice before crashing into a clump of brush. "Jonas!" Mara screamed, her voice cracking. She dropped the hammer, feet skidding down the incline, hands clawing at the earth for balance. He was on his side, dazed but alive, arm curled around his ribs. Mara fell to her knees beside him, grabbing his shoulders. "Are you hurt?" He coughed. Mostly pride. She let out a shaky breath, gripping his coat. "You idiot." He looked up at her, wind still in his ears, dirt in his mouth. "You called my name," he murmured. Mara blinked, realization dawning, and she didn't deny it. The fire crackled low as dusk settled over the valley. The sky had turned a deep, bruised blue, and the wind had finally quieted. Mara knelt beside Jonas near the rebuilt frame of the shelter, a strip of cloth in her hands and a crease between her brows. "You should have let me fall," Jonas muttered, wincing as she dabbed the scrape on his temple. "Then I'd be out here alone again," she said softly. He didn't argue. The fall hadn't broken anything, just a bruised side, scraped elbow, and a cut above his eye, but Mara tended to it with the same care she once used for Abel's calloused hands. She worked in silence, biting her lip, steady even as her fingers trembled. Jonas sat still. It had been a long time since someone had touched him without suspicion or fear. She looked at him differently. Not with forgiveness, not yet, but something honest. He could live with that. When she finished binding his arm, she sat back on her heels. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Jonas said, "I was afraid to see you again." Mara turned to the fire but said nothing. "I wasn't afraid of you," he continued. "I was afraid of what you'd see in me." She glanced at him, waiting. "I blamed myself," he said. "Still do. I pushed for that shortcut. I was too stubborn to listen. Abel saved me because he always did. And he swallowed. I thought if I saw you, I'd see that blame in your eyes. Hear in your voice what I've told myself every day since." Mara stared into the flames. "I wasn't at the funeral," he added. "Not because I didn't care. Because I couldn't carry the weight of it." The tarp above them rustled as the wind stirred again. Then Mara's voice came, low and hoarse. "I blamed myself, too." Jonas looked at her. She didn't meet his gaze. "We argued that morning. Foolish things. I told him he was reckless, that he always followed you into trouble." He laughed, said, "You needed someone watching your back." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I should have stopped him. Should have been kinder. I should have known it was the last time." Her eyes filled, and the tears came, not loud or broken, but deep and quiet, like something long withheld. "I thought maybe he'd have stayed," she whispered, "if I hadn't been so angry." Jonas reached into the canvas bundle beside him. He pulled out the green woolen shawl, still faintly scented of cedar and smoke. He held it out. Mara stared, hands frozen, her lips parted. "That was his," she said. Jonas nodded. "He kept it in the barn. Always said you needed it more." Mara took it slowly, reverently, then pulled it to her chest. Her hands shook again, but this time, from something else. Jonas looked away. After a while, she rose and folded the shawl carefully across a crate. Then she turned to him. "We should finish before the light's gone." He nodded. Together, they lifted a beam into place. Jonas held it steady, while Mara drove in nails with even strikes. When she passed him a brace, their fingers brushed, but neither pulled away. The rhythm came naturally now, measured, wordless, almost peaceful. For the first time, they worked not as two people haunted by what they'd lost, but as two souls beginning to carry it forward. Not forgiveness, but something like grace. The final beam was nearly in place when the sound of hooves cracked through the still afternoon. Jonas straightened first, turning toward the trail that ran along the ridge above. Mara followed his gaze, her hands lowering the hammer slowly as dust stirred in the distance. 3 men rode into view, familiar figures from town. Clyde Stoddard, the leather-skinned hunter who traded pelts and gossip in equal measure. Willis Tapp, a wiry horse trader with a permanent sneer. And behind them, Hank Mercer, who managed the town's stock pens and always found a way to know everyone's business. They slowed as they approached, curiosity sharpening into something meaner when they saw who was below. "Well, I'll be damned," Clyde said, leaning forward in his saddle. "A Calder and a Calder's widow, building a nest out here in the dirt." Jonas's jaw tightened. He kept his hands at his sides. Willis chuckled. "Guess grief don't last as long as it used to." Hank spat into the grass. "No preacher, no paperwork, just hammer and tarp. Real cozy arrangement." Jonas took one slow step forward, voice level. "You've said your piece." "Just stating what folks will say anyway," Clyde replied, grinning. "You think people won't talk, seeing you two playing house where the man's own brother used to stand." Mara stood frozen behind the shelter's half-finished frame. The words hit like stones, and though she didn't flinch, her grip on the hammer faltered. Jonas stepped again, placing himself slightly in front of her, but did not raise his voice. "Ride on." Willis leaned on the pommel of his saddle, smile ugly. "She always did turn heads, even before Abel passed. Guess you waited long enough to make it look decent." That was enough. Jonas moved forward fast, hands clenched. But Mara's voice rang out, sharp, not pleading. "Jonas." He stopped instantly. She was staring at the men, with her chin lifted, back straight, face pale, but unwavering. "Let them talk," she said. "They always have." The 3 men exchanged looks, smirks fading just slightly when they realized she would not crack. "Suit yourselves," Clyde said, wheeling his horse. "But don't come whining when the town turns its back." They rode off, laughter echoing behind them. The moment stretched long after the sound of hooves disappeared. Mara slowly lowered herself onto a crate, staring into the middle distance, her fingers clenched tightly in her lap. Jonas stood near the post, breathing steady but shallow. "I am sorry." She did not look at him. "That is what they think, that I lured you here, that I am something shameful. They do not matter. They matter when I walk into town, and mothers pull their daughters close." Jonas said nothing. She turned to him then, her voice raw. "They will never let me live in peace, not if I lean on you." He nodded slowly. "Then I should go." Mara's eyes widened. "What?" "I did not come here to make things harder for you," Jonas said. "If my being here costs you your name, I will leave." He began gathering his things, the tarp, the hammer, the pack rope. Then, her hand caught his coat sleeve. "Please," she whispered, voice trembling, "do not leave before the storm." Jonas froze. It was the first time she had asked him to stay, the first crack in the armor she had worn since Abel's death. It was not accusation in her eyes anymore, but fear, weariness, a flicker of something he could not name. The clouds were thickening again. The wind had picked up, cold and restless. Jonas nodded. "I will stay until morning." She let go of his coat, stepping back with a small, almost imperceptible sigh. "I will sleep under the frame," he added, "near the fire. You will have the tarp and the lee side." She did not argue, just turned away and resumed tying the final brace of the shelter, as if the words had not passed between them. He slept that night, with his back to the fire, boots still on, rifle beside him, not out of threat, but habit. The wind howled against the boards, but for the first time in many nights, Mara slept behind a wall that did not shake. And Jonas, kept awake by wind and thought, did not regret staying. The storm came just after midnight. It arrived not with a whisper, but with a roar, sudden and violent, as though the prairie itself had risen to remind them how small they truly were. The wind howled through the valley, bending the cottonwoods. The shelter groaned under the strain, boards creaking, nails screaming, thunder cracked like cannon fire, and rain followed in icy sheets, needling through every seam. Jonas braced himself against the weakest side of the structure, arms spread, boots buried in the mud. Each gust slammed into him. His coat was soaked, hair plastered to his forehead, legs numb from the cold. Behind him, near the center beam, Mara held the lantern high, shielding it with her shawl. The flame guttered, but it cast a dim, flickering light, just enough for Jonas to see. "You need to move," he shouted. "I can't," she called. "If the light goes out, then stay low, but stay safe." The tarp snapped like a whip. A loose board clattered near Jonas's shoulder, missing by inches. He ducked, pressed harder into the frame, shoulder against the post. It held, for now, but the wind was gaining. Then came the worst gust yet, screaming and sharp. It caught Mara's skirt. She stumbled, arms flailing, the lantern jerking sideways. "Mara!" Jonas turned just in time to see her fall. He lunged, catching her at the waist, as a board tore free from above, and spun toward them like a blade. He pulled her close, turned his back, and took the hit across his shoulder and arm. The board cracked and dropped into the mud. They collapsed in the corner of the shelter. Jonas grunted, clutching his arm. The lantern was out. Rain hammered the tarp. Wind keened through the frame. But for a moment, everything else vanished. Mara was in his arms, cold, breath shallow, trembling. He held her tighter, not from need, from instinct, and she didn't pull away. There was no fear in her grip, no hesitation, only something raw and human. She looked up, face streaked with rain and dirt. "Jonas." "I've got you," he said, voice hoarse. She nodded, then caught sight of his hand. "Your arm." He looked down. Blood ran from his wrist, the cut deep and jagged. "Oh God," she whispered, "you're bleeding." "It's fine." "It's not." Her voice cracked. "Jonas." He blinked at the sound of her saying his name, the way it caught in her throat. She tore a strip from her shawl and bound his hand, knotting it tightly. "You should have let me fall," she murmured. But her hands said the opposite. The wind eased near dawn. Rain faded to drizzle. The worst had passed. They sat side by side in the mud, leaning against the shelter they had built together. The fire was long dead. Their breath hung in white clouds. The world had quieted. Jonas stared ahead. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "Abel asked me to protect you." Mara turned slightly. "But now, I'm not here because of him," Jonas said. "I'm here because I want to be." He didn't look at her, but her hand found his, and rested there. Light, steady. Jonas closed his eyes. The weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but no longer unbearable. They didn't speak again that morning, but they stayed together. Morning came slow and quiet. the way it always does after a storm. The sky had cleared to a soft, pale gray, streaked with early gold, and the wind, once fierce and punishing, now moved gently through the grass like a long exhale. Mara stepped out from beneath the shelter, boots squelching in damp earth. Her shawl clung to her shoulders, dark with dew, but her posture was different, upright, still, but not tense. Not today. The structure stood. 4 walls, a sloped roof, reinforced corners. The frame groaned softly but held true, even after everything the night had hurled at it. She raised her hand and touched one of the beams, fingers sliding over the clean edge. Solid, straight, no splinters. These weren't the warped, broken planks she had started with. These were boards that belonged to something lasting. Jonas joined her a moment later, stepping out with a slight limp, and his arm still bound in the torn fabric she had tied. His face was lined with fatigue, but there was a quiet strength in his eyes. They stood together, shoulder to shoulder, gazing at what they had built. "You did good work," Jonas said, his voice rough with sleep and something deeper. "So did you," Mara replied. He looked at her then, not with pity, not with apology, but with a kind of honest respect. The kind a man gives a person who has earned it. "I will never try to be able," Jonas said softly. "I cannot be him, and I will not pretend." Mara said nothing, but her expression remained open. "I just want to help you live," he continued, "and if it is something you want, help you build something new, something real." Mara was quiet for a long breath. Then she looked back at the shelter, her fingers still resting on the beam. "Then, let's start," she said, her voice steady, with good wood. Jonas's eyes flickered, and something in his chest eased. He slowly removed one glove, fingers stiff from cold. Then, without speaking, he reached down and took her hand in his. It was not a dramatic gesture. No kiss. No declaration. Just a hand, worn and rough, reaching for another, and Mara, with no hesitation this time, folded her fingers into his. They stood like that in the morning light, 2 people once broken by loss, now standing beside something they had built together, not just a shelter, but a symbol, a beginning. The boards creaked gently in the breeze, but the structure held firm, like a promise, like a vow not yet spoken but deeply understood. Jonas looked out over the prairie stretching wide beyond them. There would be talk, there would be storms yet to come, but today, here, they had weathered one together. That was enough. For now. Beside him, Mara didn't speak, but she didn't let go either. And that, too, was enough. Out on the windswept prairie, Mara and Jonas didn't just survive the storm, they found the strength to begin again. If this story touched your heart, leave a like and hit subscribe to join us for more unforgettable tales of love, loss, and redemption on the American frontier. At Wild West Love Stories, we bring you cinematic romance where every heartbeat echoes across the open land. New stories every week, raw, emotional, and true to the spirit of the West. Subscribe now, where bullets missed, but hearts didn't.